The Greek historian Herodotus gives us a lot of information about the island of Aegina in the Archaic and Classical periods. Much of what he tells us revolves around the enmity between Aegina and Athens. One notable section is in the 5th book of his histories, in which he gives a digression about why Athens and Aegina dislike one another so much. In part, this is because of Thebes. The Thebans had attacked Athens with help from the Aeginetans. This section then details why the Thebans asked for Aegina's help and what happened afterwards. They continued to consider factors such as these until someone figured it out and said, "I think I understand what the prophecy is trying to tell us. Thebe and Aegina are said to have been daughters of Asopos. Since they are sisters, I believe the god has advised us to ask the Aeginetans to become our avengers." They decided that no other explanation appeared to be better than this one, and so they at once sent to the Aeginetans, calling upon them to rush to their assistance in accordance with the oracular instructions and on the grounds that they were closest. The Aeginetans replied to those asking for their help that they would send the Aeacidae back with them. Because the Aeacidae were now allied with them, the Thebans attempted an attack but suffered rough treatment at the hands of the Athenians. So once again they sent envoys to Aegina, this time to return the Aeacidae and to ask for men. The Aeginetans, both elated by their present prosperity and mindful of their ancient enmity towards the Athenians, now responded to the Theban request by waging an undeclared war against the Athenians. So while the Athenians were occupied with their attack on Boeotia, the Aeginetans sailed in warships to Attica and laid waste to Phaleron, as well as to many demes along the rest of the coast, and thus inflicted great damage on the Athenians. Part of the reason the Athenians and Aeginetans do not like one another is because of some statues that the Athenians said the Aeginetans had stolen. So the Athenians go to Aegina to try to get these statues back. Now the Athenians say that after they had asserted their demand and had been refused, they dispatched a single trireme manned with citizens sent by the authority of the state, and when they arrived in Aegina, they attempted to tear the statues from their bases on the grounds that they were made of their own olive wood. When they found themselves unable to gain possession of the statues in this way, they tied ropes around the statues and began to drag them off. But as they were doing so, peals of thunder and an earthquake occurred at the same time. The crew of the trireme lost their minds as they tugged on the ropes, and in this state began to kill one another as though they were enemies, until only one man was left, and he alone was conveyed back to Phaleron. Well, that's how the Athenians described what happened. But the Aeginetans say that the Athenians did not come in a single ship, for if there had been only one or even a few ships more than that, the Aeginetans would have easily driven them away, even if they did not then happen to have ships of their own. In fact, they say the Athenians who sailed against their land came with many ships, and that the Aeginetans yielded and would not engage them in a naval battle. They cannot reveal precisely whether they yielded in acknowledgement of their inferiority in sea fighting, or whether they did so because that was in accord with the plan which they eventually carried out. So when no one ventured out to do battle with them, the Athenians disembarked from their ships and turned their attention to the statues. When they found themselves unable to tear them away from their bases, they tied ropes around them and began to drag them off until the statues did the same thing. What the Aeginetans say happened next, which I cannot believe, although some may do so, is that as the statues were being dragged off, both of them fell to their knees, and from then on remained in that position. Moreover, the Aeginetans say that when they learned that the Athenians intended to wage war against them, they secured the assistance of the Argives, so that after the Athenians had disembarked and were present on Aegina, the Argives came to the aid of the Aeginetans, secretly crossing over to the island from Epidaurus. They fell upon the Athenians, who had no advance warning of their arrival, and cut them off from their ships just as the thunder and earthquake struck. That is the account told by the Argives and the Aeginetans, and they agree with the Athenians that only one Athenian returned home to Attica safe and sound, except that the Argives say that it was they who destroyed the Attic army from which the one man survived, while the Athenians attributed the loss of the army to a divine force. Actually, that one man did not survive long either, but perished in the following way. After he had returned to Athens, he reported the disaster, and when the wives of the men who had served with him against Aegina heard of it, they became outraged that of all the men he alone had come back safely. They took hold of him on all sides, and as they all asked him where their husbands were, they stabbed him with the pins of their cloaks. And so that is how he too died. To the Athenians, what the women had done seemed an even more terrible disaster than the loss of the army. They could find no other penalty to impose upon the women except to make them change their style of dress to the Ionian fashion. Prior to this, the Athenian women had worn Dorian clothing, which most resembles the Corinthian style, but now they changed to wearing a linen tunic so that they would have no pins to use. The truth is that this style of dress was originally not Ionian, but Carian, since long ago all Greek women dressed in the fashion that we now call Dorian. This etiological tale appended to the story of the enmity of the Athenians and the Aeginetans is one of the ethnographic touches that Herodotus has in his history that makes his history so much fun to read. There are other moments in Herodotus' history in which he mentions the people of Aegina. Most importantly is in the Battle of Salamis, where the Aeginetan commander is distinguished for his bravery, and the Aeginetan ships are once again talked about as being superior to almost every other navy.